The fourth round of balancing changes is here, and this one is not very exciting, so let's start right off. The first part is small improvements to the changes introduced on part 1 and 2. First off, the Ferumbra boss's experience increased by 100%, and 4 times in the case of Ferumbra's final. This is a suggestion that I gave in my cover of the first part, and even though I do think they give good enough experience now, one of the main problems with these bosses has not been addressed, and that is that most of them have creatures summoned by the room, and each of these creatures give experience, but just a tiny bit of it. In some cases, like in Ferumbra's final, they give 20 XP, and in other bosses they barely give a few hundred XP. And the problem with doing bosses with those summons is that the amount of stamina consumed is vastly higher than a normal boss. On other bosses, you might spend 10 minutes killing it, but only the boss will reward XP at the end, so you lose 2 minutes of stamina per boss. But in this case, especially with some of them having high XP or mechanics involved, you can spend more than 10 minutes, and during that entire time you will be losing stamina. So even though it is a nice incentive, it's still missing out a bit more of improvement, especially the summons, but there is also to consider that their loot is not good, the 2-day cooldown, and they are not easy to get to. So only people aiming for boss tier points will truly consider doing them, or perhaps some mid-level teams that are high enough to run through the spawns, and perhaps do quick speedruns of the bosses for a bit of XP. Next up, we have some changes for Ferumbra's Ascension spawns. The first one of the Undead Seal, Undead Dragons get 4% and Black Walkers get around 10% XP increase. I have a video coming up trying out the Ferumbra's Ascension spawns post changes, so I did try the spawns before this change and it had potential. This tiny bit of XP can be meaningful as both of these creatures are the ones with the more respawn. But at the same time, this test was done in the first floor only, with no charms. If we had charms, there is a good chance that we will overkill, and a team will definitely run into that sooner. And the second floor, as I discussed on part 2, is nowhere a good spot as it is. That floor needed far more rework of the map, but all they did was delete one wall and that's it. So even though that room has more density that could fit a team, the map design remains bad for hunting. Moving on to the Grounds of Fire. Hellfire fighters got their XP increased by around 12%, and they have the second highest density of creatures, but this is still not a good hunting spawn. Although I do like the improvement to the passage to the right side. They added about one more creature of each monsters and increased the size of the rune in the middle, making this pool far better than it was before. But keep in mind that this was the worst spawn in the test hunts we did, and this buff probably don't make it better than the others. Next up, Medusa Tower. They added 4 serpent spawns instead of omnivoras on +1. I think 1 extra Medusa or serpent spawn in +3, 1 Medusa in +4, nothing in +5, and 2 Medusas with the new mini-boss introduced on part 3. Not much of a fan of the last 2 Medusas with the mini-boss as a paladin, but with EKs is great. And besides that, the teleport will also take you to +1 instead of the entrance to the base floor, which is an improvement to anyone that wasn't overkilling, but a nerf to those that were overkilling. I did a bit of hunting on my EK that is far higher level than recommended for the spawn, and overkilling was easy, and that's without adding a pool of the base floor. But I am still happy with the changes, and I was already content with the spawn before this, so now it's better in my opinion. Moving on, Frost Dragons will be casting their Paralyze less often, which is great. This is another spawn I was happy with the changes already. Next up is Creep Warriors doing less damage. This again doesn't do anything, it ignores the main problems with the spawn of having bad experience and loot, on top of a bad map for the second floor. Next up, the actual new changes. A bit of XP increase for the Skeleton Elite Warriors and Undead Gladiators of about 7% and 8%, which is towards the right direction as they definitely need their speed higher, but this is not enough just yet. I only hunted this spawn during Rapid and we were doing 3kk raw, and this will represent maybe around 10% more raw XP. And lastly, the Gloom Pillars, which is a spawn of Rotten Blood. The attack from the pillars in the spawn are being slightly reworked depending on the vocation they first hit and then bounce off after. Their notes say this should be a reduction of the damage and better distributed between vocations to match their HP differences. And I don't have any opinions to give here as I have no experience on Rotten Blood creatures. With that said, that's all we got for this patch, and even though none of the changes were particularly bad, my disappointment is that 6 out of 8 changes on this spawn were adjustments from previous patches. And don't get me wrong, I'm very happy with them listening to feedback and doing further changes, but we only have 3 to 4 more patches as they previously announced, and from 70 spawns in the list, only 17 have been addressed. And since they have yet to do a big list of changes at once, then it hints at possibly not covering all of the spawns on the list, and that's where my disappointment is. But we will have to wait and see. So far, they've been doing a good job, and had they not set themselves a time limit for the balancing patches, I would have been more hopeful. Let me know your thoughts on the changes in the comments, and if you want to give feedback to Cipsoft, use the official forums as well. Thank you for watching, and a special thanks to the Guild Casualty from Pulsera, Nice Star, and Tuna Hero for supporting the channel.